So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good day, everybody. Welcome to this fireside chat of Startup Grind with Mark GARNER. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Steve. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Welcome. First, a few housekeeping notes about Startup Grind. We are the world's largest community of startups, founders, innovators, and creators. And we see it as our mission to give every startups everywhere in the world the education and opportunities they need to build, grow, and scale their companies. And we believe in making friends, not contacts. We believe in giving first, not taking. We believe in helping others before helping ourselves. And during this fireside chat, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions or post your comments either in the chat or via the Q&A. So, without further ado, Mark, Vision Sprint, what is it in a nutshell, in one sentence?
Okay, a vision sprint is really simply about prototyping how you see your future product to be. So before you even get started, it's possible to actually prototype what a vision could be.
Okay, great. But I mean, you also have been doing other things and so on, but how did it start? I mean, this vision for Vision Sprints, I mean,
Okay.
where did it start? What was the pain you identify where you say, gosh, there must be a better way to do it?
Well, I think my story sort of starts back in about, I suppose, 2015. In Berlin, there was this big surge of startups, and everyone was getting super excited about, the next big thing. I had friends who started various projects, and some of them got picked up very quickly by incubators, and they ended up at Techstars and various things. And it was like, oh, I want to do this as well. So a good friend of mine and I got together and we started a startup, and we did an approach that's still very popular now. We did the fail incredibly slowly approach. And we basically burnt through a lot of money and worked in a tiny little group, really kind of like thinking, well, we can't show anyone our idea yet. It's not right yet. It's not good enough. And unfortunately, we worked like this for a really long time, for about 6 or 7 months, burning through money, investors' money. And at some point, I came across this thing called a design sprint. And I was like, oh, we still haven't really been able to get over this hurdle. Let's try and run a design sprint. So the book from Jake Knapp and John Saratsky had just come out, and I had heard about design sprint through various channels. I think there was a podcast called Startup, and I heard about it first on there. And I, with that, together with the other founders of the company, we put together a design sprint with John and Dana Vatan from the Design Sprint Academy. Now, what was really interesting about it was one of the most remarkable design sprints, because on day 2 of the design sprint, the facilitators and their team came in and explained, your problem isn't a problem. You've been working on something that is no longer actually an issue. What we'd actually been working on was, I had a background in photography, and the tagline was this for Sorted was the app, which was taking photos is fun, organizing them is boring. So we gamified it. So we had a game where you could quickly choose your images. But we'd been solving a problem for ourselves. We'd never had the courage to get out there and really speak to others and to sort of, I suppose, validate and validate what we were doing. But very quickly, having had expert interviews on day 1 of the design sprint, we realized that we hadn't really been solving a problem, because there was much larger storage, so people weren't running out of storage on their phones. And secondly, AI was coming in. Even at that stage, we're talking about 2015, 2016, they started having these AIs that would tell you what your best images were. So we sat there and just like, oh my goodness, we failed. However, what was kind of interesting was we had some insights. And from one of those insights was that parents would give children mobile devices and say, you can't do anything with it. You can just look at the pictures. This was a while ago, but and so we were sort of, yeah, this could be something. So we used the remaining 4 days of the design sprint to put together like a business canvas, think about what the business model would be, then to ideate very quickly about what we could do and generate a prototype of this, and then to sit down with users. And for me, that was the start of it. And ultimately, that was the beginning of a vision sprint as well, because we had nothing to a certain extent. We just had an idea, but we had to then give it a sense of existing before we gone anywhere. So my realization was that in 4 days, we had achieved more than we had in potentially the last 6 months. And we had finally sort of, I think, discovered that you can do things so much more, so much more quickly. Ultimately, I'd love to tell you that we went on to become hugely successful, and it was a great win. Unfortunately, our founder team, I think the reason why so many, I think, startups fail was sometimes not the right balance of different disciplines, and that was certainly our case. So a bit of a shame, but it got me into design sprints, and it was like, oh my God, I'm never going to make that mistake again. I really, really, really want to work in that environment, because it was really exciting, where you have this kind of pressure, but at the same time you have so many different influences. It's a bit like a sort of almost like an improv show to a certain extent. You're getting sort of impulses from other people, and you have to forget your idea and move on, and then build on the ideas of others. So that was kind of the beginning of me getting into design sprints. And yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. On the other hand, I mean, you touch upon the point which most of the startups they always face is the founder team,
Mm-mm.
or the mates you are together. You identify it. You have a good time in identifying the pain, identifying a potential solution, eventually starting to develop it, and so. Um, how did you then move on? I mean, okay, you had this, let's call it eureka moment about
Mm-mm.
that one, about design springs and so on. But how did you move forward in
Well,
order to, yeah.
yeah, so I'd say this was kind of one of those rather sad stories. I think that to a certain extent, I stepped back eventually from that startup, because I just didn't feel that we were moving forward. And I worked together with this friend, and he carried on pushing it. And I think it was still the same mentality of, we're not quite ready to launch. We need to get more done. We need to get more done, which yeah, is I think unfortunate for so many people. They're always wanting, and then you get into that real problem where founders actually can't get any more funding because they haven't got the analytics, they haven't got the insights, they haven't got users, and they can't show the growth trajectory. So if you get into this stuck point, where I think that's the other thing, is it's a bit like launching a rocket. You've got to keep the momentum going at a really considerable speed. Otherwise, you just can't get out of the atmosphere. And so that was the one for there. But I ended up working with the guys who ran the design sprint. So I went to work for a company called the Design Sprint Academy. And I worked with them for about 4 or 5 years. And we trained teams around the world. We ran design sprints with corporations like SAP and Procter and Gamble, and lots and lots of companies. We would run design sprints, and also training teams. And that was also one of the points where I came into this particular one. I was no longer working with them, but the founder John recommended me for a particular job, and it was a company had reached out and said, we want to run a vision sprint. And during the time I've trained teams, I've always said you can run a design sprint for anything, because it's a way of like prototyping a concept. And normally when you run a design sprint, I'm not sure if your audience are familiar with them. I can imagine they probably are. If not, very quickly,
Yeah,
it's a
please.
way of very rapidly validating a solution to potentially a large problem. You bring a team from a multidisciplinary team from different backgrounds, bring those together. Each of them shares out the information they have. Once we have the same knowledge, we all come up with a solution. We choose the best elements from that solution, put them into a prototype, and then we go to our actual users and see whether we can validate or invalidate our solution. So they vary in time. You can run them. To be honest, I've worked with Google, and they sort of said, well, how long have we got? The concept's the same. It's sort of basically research, ideate, prototype, and then test. So how long you take for those phases can vary greatly. So what happened was this company came to me with a challenge. They needed to show investors where they were going, what was the big vision, and this was for a next round, a series, I don't know, C round of funding. It was quite a lot of money, and they wanted to be able to show investors where they were going. And also they had been, more of a grow up. They had been going in many different directions, and they were trying to change things around. So quite often what happens is when we have a vision, it can be a written statement, it can be very broad, it can be very short, or it can be very, very detailed. Sometimes we have these huge monster documents which list out this vision. But this was, I think, sometimes the problem. It's very difficult to quickly share the information. And also where we have things that are, so should we say text, for instance? Text is one of those things where we leave a lot of gaps. Someone's interpretation of a particular word can be completely different to my own. And what I think when you start being more visual and using like a vision approach to it, people can tend to see the value. So I looked around. There's some information about VisionSprints, and there's some people running this process. But the basic concept is, instead of us drilling deep down into a very specific part of a product or business, which is normally what you do in a design sprint. Normally you'll look at a complete user journey from the beginning through to the sort of end, and look at a various section and say, okay, we're gonna look at maybe delivery of this product. We're gonna solve how to make that section much better. But within a vision sprint, what you do is you identify the various areas of a user journey that you will need to solve problems for. And then what you do is you kind of think about hinting at how we're going to solve this. So rather than drilling deep down into the solution, you give an idea of what would happen. And that overall gives you then a visual representation of how we would solve this product and problem in the future. And once you've done that, you can, of course, sit down and go to your users and actually see what they say. And it's such a enlightening process, because at the same time, your users or the stakeholders who you involve vary. You have the investors, but then equally, you quite often have the product teams themselves, who really need to be able to grasp where they're going. What are the different areas that we're looking at? And of course, sometimes it can also involve bringing people into a new company and getting them to be excited about this potential journey you're going to take people on.
And then when you look at it, I mean, a vision is always important. And on the other hand, when would be a good time for, let's just say, for a venture to start eventually using it? Because in the beginning, you are more focused on the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you also hinted at, okay, you may miss one or the other thing. So when is a good time to start with it, knowing that it is, I think, a process, iterative process, which you repeat during the lifetime? When would you say, okay, if somebody now from Startup Grind, a venture, would come, what would be the ideal moment in the life of the venture?
I think ultimately, as soon as you have your idea, and if you can identify, I mean, I suppose the first thing I'd always say is, with any sort of these design vision sprints, you need to have some research. So I think that would be the first thing. You need to know your user. You need to understand them deeply and have a good understanding of them, have a good basis of research. We then would want to bring together a multidisciplinary team. So this is kind of very valuable to have the insights from different people. So I think if we have those elements together, we have a good idea of where we'd like to get to. We're not sure how we're going to get there. We have really a good understanding of our users in the area we're moving into. And I can identify some multidisciplinary people. It might not be that they're your team, but they might be the people who have the right ideas. And if we can bring those together, that's a great time to actually run one of these sprints. I would say you would need the core team. You might, because also you can break it into different areas. What I've done in the past is you'd have the specialist group who have the knowledge can come in for about a day and a half. One day for fully understanding what the challenge is and where you want to go with this. And then it's about a half a day for them to ideate and decide where you're going to focus. And from there, you can then just bring a prototyping team together. You want people who have got good, strong graphic skills and really strong storytelling, because you're selling at this stage that sort of Goldilocks idea, just enough information so that people can believe that this is possible, but you're not drilling down into a solution of how you're going to actually do these steps.
Okay, let's. You have the venture. They have done set up the story. They have the idea, and okay, then they go in order to chase for the best solution. Or let's say so they identify a solution. They start developing it and so on. They try to do the MVP and so on. And how when would be then a next step to do eventually to adjust or to calibrate the vision? When would that be?
Well, I think for your MVP, it's a super question, Steve. I think for the MVP, what you're going to be doing is you're going to look into that journey and this vision, the way you said, this is what we're going to set out and do. And you'd have to say, okay, what's the first step? What's the very first thing that we need to do and be able to deliver in order for us to say that we're moving into this vision? Because there might be one key thing, one key sort of, okay, so we need to actually create this element of the product. So that in itself is where you'd start drilling down. Again, I'm a big fan of the process of going through, again, a design sprint. So we'd take this one slice of our vision and we'd sit down and say, okay, this is where we're going to drill down. This is where we're going to go out, do some more research into this specific area. And from here, we're going to bring together the team with the right insights from different backgrounds. And there we're going to ideate and come up with a solution. So I think it's a series of sprints that you just keep on running. As soon as you run that, you'll either validate or invalidate your approach. But what's brilliant about design sprints, what I love about them, is even when you have a complete miss, you invalidate your solution, you go, oh, that wasn't it. You more than likely have gathered so much information and so many different insights from the actual user testing that you have a really strong idea of which way to go. Or there's another advantage sometimes, which is you fail and you just say, hey, do you know what? We shouldn't do this. We've learned really early on that this is not going to work. People don't like it. People don't want it. And when this actually happens, I think this is much more valuable than people realize. To discover this, I can say this from my own heart, to discover this as early as possible, your investors, your friends, your loved ones will all thank you for failing really quickly.
Okay, and I'm picking a little bit left and right some questions. The other thing is how very often in the life of a venture, it's also not only about identifying or having the solution, developing, but to prioritize it. Does for example, with the VisionSprint, does it assist in prioritizing? Because a design sprint, it's more, okay, cluck we go, and then either it fails or we have the ways to do it. But it doesn't really assist in prioritizing.
I think generally what happens, and what I've seen is that you use that vision sprint mostly to go out and convince people to either join you on the adventure or to invest in it. So it's a great tool for actually going out and reaching out to these people to try and get investment or to get people on board. And it's also a way of looking at all the various challenges that you have. And it's pretty clear normally what that first challenge is. If we look at any particular user journey, there's always going to be one crucial moment that if we can get that right, then these other elements are going to be much easier. So I would say that the team themselves will sit down there and be able to easily identify, okay, that's where we've got to start.
Okay, great. Thank you. And on the other hand, I mean, we have been talking about a team and getting people in. What would be a suitable size
Yeah,
for the running it?
yeah. So I saw that question from Scott. It's a good question. It falls into this sort of agile sort of squad sort of size, which I think is why we settled around about 7 to 8 people. Tends to be the sort of optimal size. And I think what it is you're trying to get as much variety and different insights into the team, whilst at the same time not creating too much of a conversational overhead. Because if we end up with a larger group, then we're not going to be able to productively get through the various exercises and processes that we need to do. So I think 7 to 8 is really a good size. And you're generally also going to need a couple of other roles. You'll need a facilitator. It's not good if you try and do this yourself, from the point of view of if you have skin in the game. If you're invested in this, you should be contributing to that design process. But we can't contribute and also remain neutral. We tend to introduce bias if we try facilitating it. So quite often, if you can find someone else who can facilitate it, you'll get better results. When we're in startup mode, most of us tend to think, oh, we can do everything. I've read a book and I've done this and I'll try it. But this is one area where I can tell you, you really, really need to make sure that your facilitator, and you will need a facilitator for the design sprint, or vision sprint, is going to be neutral and just focused on the process and making sure that we can get through each stage of it.
And on the other hand, I mean, looking at the size of the teams, but on the other hand, also on, let's say, so the qualification or the skills of the teams. Because if you very often you address an issue,
Yeah.
and this issue you could address it from red side, blue side, yellow side, and so on. And very often it's hard to address it from all sides at the same moment, at the same time. So would it make sense to run sprints, especially vision sprints, for example, saying, okay, now we look at that blue side and we take the people with the blue skill. Then we look at the yellow side and we take the people with the yellow side. And in the end, we see, okay, what comes out. And we eventually try to adjust it.
Well, that's again a really good question, and I think that's why we test. So what we're trying to do is we'll probably try and bring that variety into the sprint team. So we've got different sort of different insights from from the different mentality of it. We'll try and bring as much of the different insights from them in there, and then we can run tests. And the thing about a prototype is that you can adjust the prototype. I think with generally when you're building these prototypes, we test with like 5 or 6 users, and that was always I think Jacob Nielsen's, we can discover 80% of the errors. But I think when you're doing visions, sometimes people will just say something, you'll realize straight away that, oh, they've got a really valid point. So what I've always done in the past is just quickly adapt and change the prototype to take the new information in and test with someone new. So it becomes an evolving process. It's not like we need to fix this in and it's either it's broken. We need to be able to say, okay, we've tested that section didn't work, we changed this. Now let's sit down again with users. And it's like trying to perfect something to as good as you can, and until people agree that this is what they could work for. This is where they want to go.
Now coming a little bit on the business side, I mean, as a venture, you are already having a hardship to cover the resources, find resources, cover the resources, and so on. And until you get the first paying customer, then you still have a lot of things to cover. And with, for example, with a vision sprint, it takes time. And how long does it generally take?
I'd say the main thing is the sort of is a little bit of the iceberg, unfortunately. The sprint itself shouldn't take more than 4 days, of which time you would need some experts or the people who are going to bring the information in for a day and a half. And that would be breaking down into sharing information, getting everyone up to speed, getting as much understanding of the customer, and then ideating about potential areas that you would solve, deciding what they would be. And then it would be from there, it would be prototyping, which would be really taking the storyboard, what came out of the ideas, and creating some sort of document. So that normally is about a day's work on that. And then the testing can just roll from there. I say it depends what your aim was, but the main aim is obviously when we create that vision, we want to make sure that we can actually convince people that this is a viable product. If you can't, then it's time to maybe rethink things. But I think that the core time that really takes is to sit down, spend time speaking to users. And once you've done that, it really is, you should go as quickly as possible. I think there's also the right it. I don't know if I love this really prototyping, I think it's called. I can't think of his name right now. Alberto. But if I'll try and find a link for that. But it's really test your concept as early as possible. Don't start building a product and trying to launch it until you've got some sort of like idea of whether people really, whether they resonate with this. Even better, if you can find some way of getting them to put some money in it, then you're definitely going in the right direction. So I think this validation, it shouldn't take long. It should be something we should all do as early as possible. Hey, we've got this idea. How the hell can we prototype this and test it?
Okay, thank you. On the other hand, we have it, we have done it, we have the vision and so on, we develop it. Um, what are, for example, I mean, it's something for you, you are offering, and the how do we fund it, and what is your business model? Let's call it like that for
Mm.
yourself now.
So if you were setting out as a startup, I mean, to be honest, that's something I would hope you have spent some time beforehand, before going into this, to think about what that business model is. Because that's also going to be something, it's all very well coming up with a vision if there's no potential way of making some income from it. That is a challenge in itself. I think what this stage is it should identify where the incomes are coming from within the vision. It doesn't need to fill out the business model. It should be clear, but it should at the same time, that's going to be another element that you're going to build into it, is how do we actually generate revenue from this? But I think we still use the standard tools. I would rough it out again with a canvas, looking very broadly at it, and then do some research to see if there's actually if that's valid or not.
And it's coming up a little bit also is, okay, we have been focused a little bit on young ventures, on
Mm.
early ventures. And how is it when, as you have been touching on upon it during the introduction,
Mm.
is how is it when we move on? We have paying customers, we have products, services, we are in a growth mode.
Mm.
Eventually, we scale up and so on. And then, let's say we run again the vision sprint, and then we notice, oops, there are some avenues which we haven't thought about it, but which eventually could cannibalize the ones we
Mm.
have now. How would you address that one?
So, sorry, to just confirm the
Mm.
question. So, is it about then you've noticed that there's more areas that you can develop which you haven't taken the opportunity for? Or is it that you're noticing that the direction you're going would cause more damage to your business? I wasn't.
It's let's just say it's both. It
Okay.
was a little bit of one
Okay.
and the other.
Okay, okay. So I think this is always an interesting stage in any business is when they've got to the stage where they've been successful to a certain point. And what happens quite often is as we build, we tend to run into like a product roadmap, and people are just generating, they're working in their agile sprints, and they're just thinking about the next feature they're launching. But quite often teams then end up somewhat disillusioned because they don't actually know what the longer term goal is. And to be honest, quite often companies aren't entirely sure themselves. So this is, I think, an ideal time sometimes to go like, okay, we've got a rough idea that we're going this direction. We know that we can't keep just doing what we've been doing because at some point there's going to be too many other competitors, others are taking market shares, there's been shifts in technologies. There's a ton of stuff that will have happened along the way once you have established yourself. So it is a case of them being able to sit down and say, okay, let's have a look. What other directions can we go in? What other things should we be looking at to make sure that we can retain a competitive edge, and at the same time make sure that everyone in the team knows that that's what the plan is? Because I think sometimes what happens is we have sudden hard executive decisions to make a complete U-turn or go in another direction. And this can be very disorientating for teams and can quite often cause, a lot of frustration because people have worked very hard on a product roadmap to develop features and suddenly realize that, oh no, actually, we don't need that anymore. We're killing that baby is rather tough. But if you can say, hold it, we are killing this baby so we can do this, this, and this, then it can be much more motivating. And I think that's the thing about a vision. When you have it, it's about setting sort of ultimate goals. This is where we're going. So if we were to stop here on this particular product, doesn't matter because we have a bigger vision for you.
Okay, great. So, I mean, now we touched upon, I mean, we talked about the Vision Sprint, what it is, its added value, and so on. Now we are convinced about it, but how do we go about it?
Okay.
What would be the next steps?
Well, the next steps would be, I think the main thing to do is make sure you get the right people in the room. I'll be completely honest with you. It depends with a startup, it's so much easier. A lot of the time I'm working with larger corporations. So for me, I need to get the senior stakeholders, first of all, either to join or to sign off on it. So with a startup, that's one of the huge advantages you have is that you have probably potentially more time and you're going to have access to quickly doing things. So the main thing is to try and find the right people. So once we've decided, okay, we're going to create this, we might not have that team yet, but we might be able to then bring together some super smart people out of our network who have the knowledge that you would like to bring into this product. And the other thing, what I find is sometimes is you shouldn't be so precious about ideas and bringing people in early stage, because an idea is honestly, it's just an idea. It's not about the idea. It's always going to be about how it's implemented and how well the team can do with it. So that's it. So bring the team together, make sure you've got your research, and then you're going to have to sit around, figure out the actual process. I think there's various Medium articles and other stuff. We can maybe add some links to it, to rough timings and exercises and processes. It's very similar to a design sprint in as far as, first of all, we're sharing out all of the information that we found up until now. And then what we're doing is we're looking for inspiration in other industries, how they're achieving maybe, and that's, I think, a really important part. We look outside of where we're working to find some impulses. Then you want some people who are very good at thinking creatively to come up with ideas for solving it. And then you'll need some visual people who can put together, and storytellers who can put together the prototype. So it's going to be finding the right people, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are starting to come to the end.
Mhm.
So preparing the end, what would you like to see if you had a magic wand? What would you like to see in the business world or in the ventures, or what would you like to see happen in order that your vision develops further?
I think a sort of a better understanding from management about prototyping. And, the ability to let teams set off without actually necessarily knowing exactly what they're going to do. Because I think that's sometimes the challenge with this sort of idea of rapidly prototyping an idea. We don't know what it's going to be, but we need that research and that steps necessary. And quite often companies would prefer us to sort of just within a team very quickly come up with the idea and start building it. And we're going quite a long way down the line. It would be better if we can just come up with so much more of a prototype and test it. So that would be the dream. Would be like if we have this rapid prototyping mentality in teams and management supporting it, so that people can very quickly speak to users, because that's when we build good products, when we speak to our users.
Okay, great. And now, I mean, we, as in the introduction, Startup Grind is a community. We are a big
Mhm.
community, not only in Luxembourg, but
Yeah.
worldwide. What, what could Startup Grind as a community or its members assist you or provide you in
Uh,
order to
I
develop further?
I'm super curious to see what people's ideas are out there. If anyone feels like they have something they would like to develop, I'm more than happy to jump on a call and give them some advice, and that helps me. I mean, I will just love running these processes, and it's always exciting just to see where people are going with ideas. And if I can help you avoid the fail incredibly slowly and expensive path, then please reach out.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. This wraps up our fireside chat.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
sharing. Thank you for sharing. And
Yeah.
thank you, dear audience, for joining us, for your questions, comments, and remarks. And you, viewer, while reviewing it, maybe you join us live next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.